We've been talking in the last series of shows on choices, the mind, body, and spirit connection, and tonight we're going to dive in deeply into the body and discuss something called fascia. So welcome to Choices. My name is Cameron Moffatt. I'm an osteopathic practitioner in the city here, and I have the pleasure today of actually discussing with an expert on fascia how it affects your body and, more importantly, what you can do about it. Most of us don't know what fascia is. What I'd like you to do is picture a giant sponge. That's your body, and the sponge is the fascia, and the little holes in a typical sponge are where we put all the parts of the body. And it's not like we're actually sticking, say, a liver into one hole. We're putting a little piece of a liver in one hole, and another piece of a liver in another hole, and another piece of a liver in another hole, until eventually in that sponge we have an area that we call the liver. So there's nowhere in the human body where you can open it up and just pluck the liver out. You've got to cut through the fascia, and you've got to take all the fascia inside the organ or the muscle or the tendon. So it is really the primary tissue in the body, and there's been a lot of research being done on it in the last few years. What they've discovered is that when people talk of the body having a memory, they're pretty certain now it's the fascia that holds that memory. And when we talk about old injury hanging around and not letting go, years sometimes after the original injury, they know now that it's actually the fascia that can become adhesed, and our expert tonight is going to be discussing that a little bit. So I'd like to introduce Brett Holland. He is a certified rolfer, and Brett, you studied at the Colorado School.
That's right.
Of Rolfing.
Thanks, Cameron.
Yeah. And you studied, Rolfing is originally from Ida Rolf?
Yeah, Ida Rolf created Rolfing. She borrowed some information from osteopathic and yoga and a qigong and a few other things, and she looked at the body in a different way. She could see that that the fascia was involved in the alignment and the movement of the body, and when the fascia is free, everything works well and can move easily. And what she looked at, a big piece of her understanding, was the relationship of the body and gravity, and how fascia relates to gravity. So like you mentioned, fascia is everywhere, and it creates a tensional network throughout the whole body. And so when the fascia becomes imbalanced, it can pull the front body short or pull the back body short. Okay. If it's adhered or anywhere that it's shortened, it creates a twist in the body, and that's sometimes why we have a twisted hip, so one shoulder is more forward than the other or up. And Ida Rolf saw this, and she understood that we need to balance, most importantly, the layers of fascia in the body.
Okay.
And so she came up with a thing we call the 10 series, which is a systematic approach to unwinding the fascia in the body.
Right. I don't know if I mentioned to you, I've been through the 10 series.
Oh, yeah, great.
About 7 or 8 years ago. I was right in the middle of my running times, and at session 5,
yes.
I called the rolfer up and said, "What have you done to me? I'm running terribly now."
Oh, okay.
And I was running differently than what I was used to, and she said, "Don't worry about it, you're changing." And sure enough, I run better now than I did back in my 20s,
right.
and I lay that mainly on this rolfer,
right.
of opening up my fascia, which after too long of running marathons was quite tight.
Right.
And adhesed. I had a few injuries. And
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've seen that before in my practice too. And really the real skill of the rolfer is not so much about separating any one particular fascia bind, we call them fascia binds or adhesions. It's really about doing it in a way that the body can be deconstructed and reconstructed and more orders brought into the body. In that transition period,
yes,
and we need to be skillful. We need to use skillful means in order to make sure that process happens smoothly.
Okay, so you're not just going in there and ripping the fascia open.
You're doing it in very specific order.
Okay.
And that's going to change depending on who walks in the door, okay, and your fascia type. So a lot of the way I work, I change what I do depending on what I'm feeling in the moment and how they respond, how the client responds from the session 3 days later or a week later.
Okay.
And it's just a process. So it's like you're just peeling off layers. You start on the surface, and we go deeper and deeper and deeper, only as the fascia is ready. And so, for example, we may work the fascia of the upper body first, and then we work the fascia of the lower body, and then we'll work the side body. And the side body joins the upper and the lower together.
Sure.
So now we have more order.
Okay.
In session 5, the one you had trouble with, that's starting to lengthen the front body.
Ah, okay.
The core front body. And so What could have happened in your case is the back body was under a lot more tension than the front body.
Well, when I look at pictures of me running, so you know when you cross the finish line, they always take a picture of it. I always was leaning forward.
Right.
And I noticed maybe a month or two after that session 5, I was running upright, and boy, did it ever feel better.
Yeah.
Once you feel it, it's like, whoa, I didn't realize I was doing that.
Right. And that's that relationship in gravity again.
Right. I just understand
There's
that
this
now.
constant force we're experiencing all the time, and we don't even think about it, and it's
Right.
called gravity.
Well, that's an interesting point. Then how would the viewers at home know that they've actually got some fascial issues? What are the symptoms that people would be able to relate? This is fascially related.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. If the fascia is working well and it's healthy, any force is transmitted through the body with ease. There's a fluidity around it. There's a vitality in the movement. There's a grace. So you see that in a lot of certain athletes that are often the ones winning the race. There's a certain grace or art to the way they move. It's fluid, and I think that's a sign of the tension of the fascia throughout the whole body being balanced.
Okay.
So when that's not there, if there's like a fascia bind, injury or a trauma to the body, physical or emotional, it will get locked up in a certain area, say in my arm here, and then that will become a little shortened here because as it adheres, then it can no longer move so well.
Sure.
And it's also, the fascia is going to adhere muscles to muscles, bones to muscles, bones to bones, because it connects everything. And so suddenly I might have trouble lifting my arm up.
Okay.
And it may have started 10 years ago, and then it showed up. One day, I ran out of length.
Right.
What I tell people is, when we come into the world, we have full length.
Okay.
You know, that we come in as a baby, we have full length.
Sure.
You see a baby, they
Very
can
flexible,
move,
yes.
very flexible, very fluid. And over our lifetime, we lose a little bit here, a little bit there. We stub our toe, we hit our elbow, we have a little fall. Surgeries, emotional trauma. So we just lose it a little bit, but we can still function because there's still enough length that we can function. We're maybe working a little harder than we did before, but we can still do things.
Right.
And then suddenly we'll hit this threshold one day where it's like, oh, now I have trouble walking, or now I have this pain in my side, or really it happened a long time ago, often. And it's just, that was the straw that did the final stroke, that now we don't have that. We just don't have enough length anymore for the body to find a way around the movement.
Okay. So then in that reduction of length and that compression of the body, I guess other practitioners have to be aware of what you're doing, because to adjust a joint or to try to stretch a muscle out, or in my case, even try to, say, move an organ, if the fascia is adhesed or tighter or shortened, you're really fighting against a very dead end, aren't you? There's no way you can open that organ, that joint, without addressing the fascia.
Right, exactly. And it's hard to do it yourself sometimes. So if you look at something like yoga, it works very well at opening up the fascia.
Right.
But when there's a fascia bind that's significant, it sometimes doesn't get the physical force in that specific location to open it up. So I use the example with people, like if I do a lengthening movement through the side body in yoga, just say we're stretching here, then it's the whole line that's stretching.
Right.
So if there was a short adhesion here, it's going to be hard to get that force is going to be spread out through that whole line, and only a little bit would be here.
Right.
But if I'm using my fingers and I'm coming right in here and I'm lengthening there, now there's a lot more force at my availability to do that. I have just a lot more potential to get that one out. And then if you go back to yoga, now you can continue opening up that area that we opened up.
So your type of work would work very well then with anybody doing any sort of physical yoga, physical Pilates,
any awareness practice, yoga, works well with chiropractic as well. Later in the show, I'd like to talk to you about tensegrity if we get the time, because that ties chiropractic.
Yeah, you've got a tensegrity model, don't you?
That's right.
Let's have a look at it and see.
Okay, so this is a little kid's toy. And you can see when I put pressure here, it springs.
Right.
We call this spatially stable.
Okay.
Because as I put force in, it springs back.
Okay.
Right? And so it's very stable but flexible. And this is how we want the body to move. Like if we have a force transmitting through, we want that force to be dispersed through the whole body.
Right.
And then when that force is removed, we want the body to go back to where it was.
Bring back.
And we want that elastic quality.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you, the tensegrity means tensional integrity. That's what it stands for. And it originally was coined as from architecture. But it applies very well to the human body.
Okay.
And so I look at fascia as the tensional component of tensegrity.
Okay.
And so it's a continuous tensional network of the body, the fascia.
Right.
And so if we look at this model of tensegrity, it's a very simple one, but it can serve the purpose. These elastics, cords here, these are all elastic. So if you look, they're all continuous. So if you follow, if I put my finger here, I can track any cord and I can go to any other cord in this shape without leaving my finger.
Like the fascial
It's all
network.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now these solid pieces of wood here, we could think of these as the bones.
Okay.
And so now we have a relationship between the bones and the fascia. The bones don't touch each other. They get very close. In the joint capsules, they get very close, but we don't want bone on bone.
You don't want bone on bone.
We
no.
want a little bit of a floating feeling, ideally in the bones, and that's what we have in this model. They're not touching.
Right.
When the fascia gets out of whack, something gets shortened or adhered too much, then you can get a situation where the pressure of the bone's on the bone now, and then we get joint problems and wear and tear on the body. So by lengthening that fascia that got shortened, we can bring the balance back to the tension of the body, and now we're back to flexibility, adaptive.
Now, before the show, you were demonstrating that with me. You were showing me that if one area becomes shortened, the somewhere else, not the same site, becomes lengthened.
Lengthened, yeah.
And that's quite often what elicits the pain.
That's
that
right.
brings the person in. So let's try that again with the model. Maybe you can show the folks at home.
And this is, I think, where some people get lost in their symptoms. They'll have a pain somewhere, and they feel it, but really what's driving that pain, what the cause is somewhere else, as you would know. It would be somewhere shortened. So if we use this model and we think of tensegrity of the body, and these elastic cords are the fascia, if I shorten one of these cords, just say the fascia gets injured and gets stuck to some things, some structures in the body, that's shortened. As I do that, every other cord, and particularly these ones on the other side, are stretched long.
Long, right.
They get longer as this one gets shortened.
Hence the pain.
Hence the pain, because the muscle, the fascia here and the muscle that's getting stretched longer will get to a certain point. It says, hey, I don't want to get stretched anymore because I'm going to break if I do. So I'm going to tighten and hold on. And I think of it as like a muscle's hanging off a cliff, like just holding on for dear life.
Yeah.
While this gets shortened, and it just gets stretched and stretched, and it's just hanging on, it gets very tight, and that's where the pain comes in.
And that's the kind of person that walks in with excruciating back pain or neck pain or something.
Well, yeah, exactly. So, you know, we're often at our computers all day, most of us, and so if we're typing here and people come in and they say, oh, I'm so sore up through here and through the neck. But really, if you look at this posture, if I exaggerate it, there's a collapsing, there's a shortening that happens on the front body.
Sure.
And so we can soften the muscles here, but a week later they'll get hard again, just like we spoke about in the tensegrity. But if we get length through the front body and then relax these muscles, now we can get some long-term healing happening.
And in your scenario, you were mentioning about the computer, also help people understand that we can't sit at the computer for hours at a time without some kind of consequence.
Exactly. If for example, we resolved the length here, we brought back length here, and we relaxed the muscles here, if they no longer went to the computer, this may hold forever. For the rest of their life. If they started to go to the computer for 8 hours a day again, without anything to balance that, then sure.
They need an in-house
we will see the
rolfer.
pattern. We'll see that pattern come back.
I actually recommend people go to the dollar store, buy a little timer for $1.25. Set it for no more than 45 minutes, and then when the 45 minutes, when it starts to beep, get up. Go get a glass of water, do something. But lengthen the front line again.
The more you can move, then the more variety you put in your day-to-day life, I think then that's a good thing to do.
Let's talk a little bit about hydration, and it's important with fascia. What would you say to that?
So when I'm working on the fascia, sometimes what's so fascinating about this work is everyone's different, and throughout the whole body, the fascia has a different quality. And so as I'm working the fascia, I'm feeling the quality of the fascia. And it tells me so many things, and one of them is whether it's hydrated or not, which you were asking about.
Can you describe what a non-hydrated fascia
It can be thick and leathery kind of feeling, non-responsive. And so,
what do you mean by that, non-responsive?
So we don't have that elastic quality.
Back to the model again.
Back to the model, so I can sink in, and it just feels like, yeah, there's no elasticity,
Right.
and no recoil back when I take the pressure off.
Okay.
So there's one thing for the fascia to lengthen easily,
Mm-hmm.
but you want it to be strong enough to spring back to its original length afterwards.
Okay.
So hydration really gets in the way of all of that. Dehydration.
Dehydration, sure. Now, what about emotions? I mentioned at the opening to the folks at home that the body remembers
Right.
through the fascia.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's absolutely true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, a highly stressed situation 5 years ago may have put some physical adhesions into the fascia?
Absolutely.
It will show up physically.
And there can be with the trauma, there can be a habit, just where their attention, it can be in the fascia, and then there could be a habitual movement pattern as well, which we need to address.
Right. Okay.
So, for example, someone may be in a car accident, and they have a big emotional experience over that.
Right.
And also they had to say, I'm just using an example, they may have had whiplash.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got fascia that's physically tight and it's been pulled too far and needs to be just carefully brought back to its original length.
Right.
At the same time, there's an emotional charge.
Right.
And so, for example, every time they hop in the car, they may unconsciously tighten the whole area again. Or they may be holding this wheel with a lot of, too much effort.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I see that. So part of the solution is rebalancing the fascia, and part of it is identifying what those habitual pieces are in people's lives.
Okay.
It could be anything. And it's only through talking and getting to know the person that things become uncovered.
You get an idea of what's going on.
Sure.
There.
Someone might say, they're sore in their left neck, and I've had this happen, and it's like, what do you do for work? And they say, well, I'm on the phone, I hold it on my ear here, and I just hold it like this all day.
Yeah, you can't do that, can you? Not nowadays with headphones. Yeah,
Right.
Employers have to get headphones. Yeah, that's not.
And someone else I know, was in a car accident, and when they, every time they go back in the car, until we identified this, they would totally tense up.
Tense up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as soon as we found that out, we released the fascia one more time.
And it was done.
It was done.
Beautiful. Speaking of releasing fascia, you're going to do a demonstration for us.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so you're going to focus on showing us, and maybe you can describe for us as well what it is you're feeling, so the folks at home get a sense of what you're trying to feel as a practitioner.
Yeah, I'd really enjoy that. Visually, there's not too much. You may not see much happening, but what I'll do is I'll talk through what I'm feeling as I do the work.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, folks, we're going to take a bit of a break. Brett is going to get his table and his volunteer set up, and you'll have a chance to see some fascia being worked on. Back in just a few moments.